Yes.
So just the scroll.
Yeah, right. Okay, thanks a lot, Brett. Yeah, I'm Vincent Lanoiselet, plant pathologist within Plant Biosecurity with the Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development, formerly known as DAFWA. And yes, today we are going to have a quick chat about Myrtle Rust, and this afternoon some of my colleagues will basically show and demonstrate how to use My Pest Guide, which is an app that can help us doing some surveillance and basically for a member of the public or researchers or biosecurity officers basically to report or ask questions about what they see. So it can be weeds, insect, diseases, you name it. Basically, we provide a service to identify and report on pests and diseases. So basically, what is Myrtle Rust? Myrtle Rust is another fungal disease, but very different compared to Phytophthora dieback. But as we are going to go through it, we will see that it's equally important as Phytophthora dieback, especially for W. It's a big threat to us. And basically, it's something that we worry about. So that's Department of Ag and also DBC, obviously, and other groups like FPC and things like that. So basically, it's an airborne disease. So here we're not talking about a soil-borne disease like Phytophthora that is spread through, as we just saw, the movement of soil, water, and similar means of distribution. Here, basically, the main source of distribution of the disease is through airborne spores. And as you can see on the photo, the spores look a little bit like pollen. They're very small, but when you have a high number of them, obviously they're very visual. And you've got this mass of yellow spores, which basically look like pollen. The photo below that in black and white are basically showing electron microscopy, magnification of the spores, and just basically one spore is about 20 microns, so very small, but when you've got a big mass of them, they're very obvious. Basically, the disease is named Myrtle Rust in Australia, but overseas you would be talking about eucalyptus rust or guava rust. Basically, it's the same thing. The fungus has changed name. When it was first detected in 2010 in New South Wales, basically it was called ERADICATED, and there was a little bit of controversy as to was it the same organism as Puccini apsidae, which is also another name for Myrtle Rust. And nowadays it's called another name, Puccini apsidae, but basically they're all synonyms, to make it short. It's a disease that first originated from South America, like Brazil, and then it quickly spread to Central America, the Caribbean, some part of the US, like Florida and California. Then it moved to some countries in Asia, and Japan is known to have the disease. And eventually in 2010, in April, it was first found in New South Wales. And since then, it has spread even further, as we will see on this slide. So basically, it was first found around Gosford in New South Wales on the central coast, on a nursery production that was very close to the bush. And at first, the owner of the nursery basically contacted New South Wales DPI, thinking they had a problem with scale insects. And when New South Wales DPI went on site, they basically found out that that wasn't caused, the symptoms were nothing to do with an insect. Basically, it was Myrtle Rust. And obviously, a big incident response was mounted on a national level. And then, so it was first detected in April 2010, and a decision was made in December 2010 that the disease could not be eradicated, and there was a need to move to a transition to management. Now, the story is a little bit more complicated than that, but I'm not going into the detail. So once it was found in New South Wales, then it quickly spread to Queensland, and basically, as you can see on the map, all along the coast of Eastern Australia. Now, it took a little bit of time to reach all the Cape York Peninsula, but basically within 5 years, it was very spread between, widely spread, sorry, between the Cape York Peninsula all the way to basically Melbourne. Then it was found in Tasmania, but in Tasmania, interestingly, is that it didn't spread to the natural environment. It was only found on a couple of species, like ornamental species, and basically on people's residential edges and things like that. So Tasmania had a crack at trying to eradicate the disease, but after a year or two, basically they couldn't eradicate the disease. Then it suddenly jumped to the Northern Territory, and it was found in Melville Island, which is off the coast of Darwin. And then a few months down the track, it was found in Darwin. And so it's getting close to WA, but to date, and that's been 10 years since the first detection of the disease in New South Wales, South Australia and WA are the only state that haven't been impacted by the disease. All right, so why are we worried about Myrtle Rust? It's basically because it's a disease that affects Myrtaceae species, and as you can see on the map, we have a lot of Myrtaceae species within the state. I think the Southwest is basically a hotspot of diversity for Myrtaceae, and basically, as you can say, you can find Myrtaceae species all over the state, and obviously, it also would affect similar species as Phytophthora. So if we have a big Phytophthora problem as we have now, and you introduce another disease such as Myrtle Rust on top of it, the consequences could be pretty devastating, I think, in some part of the state. And as we mentioned before, some native species rely exclusively on Myrtaceae to survive, and therefore, yeah, it wouldn't be a good outcome if we found Myrtle Rust in WA. All right, so can it be eradicated? Basically, it's very hard to eradicate something that's windborne, and especially if it's found in the natural environment. And basically, when Australia decided that the disease could not be eradicated from Australia, it's basically when we started finding Myrtle Rust in the natural environment. And we did find it in a state forest, in the Olsen State Forest, if I remember well. And basically, I was on site. I was sent by the department to help New South Wales colleagues to do some surveillance activities. And we found it in the Olsen State Forest. And we found it in area where you couldn't even go by car. There were tracks and fallen trees and things like that, which made us think that the disease may have been probably there for a bit longer than 2010. So far there's been one attempt that seems to have been successful, and it's on Lord Howe Island and off the coast of Eastern Australia. So when they first detected it a few years ago, they basically managed to eradicate it, mostly because they don't have many Myrtaceae species on the island. It's a small island, and so far, as far as I'm aware, they haven't got the disease yet, but obviously it could be blown over again from the East Coast. But basically, when you've got an airborne disease such as any rust, the chances of eradication is very slim, unless if you find it really early, on a very small scale, and before it can spread. So how do we kept it out of WA for the past 10 years? Probably by luck, a lot of it. But basically, once the disease was detected in New South Wales, WA moved really quickly to introduce emergency measures, and basically the state decided to ban all the importation of Myrtaceae species and parts of plants as well into WA. So since then, the restrictions have been somehow, or they're not as stringent as what they used to be, but basically we still control the importation or restrict the importation of Myrtaceae into the state. And obviously, this is for goods coming from Eastern Australia. So basically, the department is in charge of regulation for movement control of goods coming from the east, or from the other state and territory of Australia. And at the same time, the federal government is responsible for keeping other strain of Myrtle Rust out of Australia through basically international borders. And the Commonwealth maintains some import restriction because of Myrtle Rust, because yeah, as I mentioned, some strains would be probably more aggressive than the one we have here in Australia. So how does it spread? So as you can see on the photo, we're talking about, obviously there's the nursery stock that can spread the disease, but we cover this through our import condition. And the big pathway that is really hard to control is basically spores. And as you can see, the spores could land on people's clothes, shoes, the backpacks, cars, you name it, basically. Anywhere where a spore can land, basically that's a way to spread the disease. So animals can spread the disease, birds, all this kind of thing. But obviously the main pathway would be human activity. So some people going for a tour or trekking on the East Coast, not properly disinfecting their clothes or shoes, and coming back here in WA, and basically maybe the next day going to Kings Park, or going for another trek in WA, and that's how you could introduce the disease. So again, like for Phytophthora, hygiene is very important. So removing all the contaminant that can be on your clothes by washing them. You can spray them with 70% ethanol or metallidate spirits, and not bringing dirty shoes and things like that before you come back from an infested area. So obviously the main thing that we also do on top of import condition is basically the surveillance, and that's why we're here today, basically to show you what we can do in terms of surveillance. And the big risk area for us would be obviously the natural environment, but also wholesale nurseries that sell myrtaceae, places like around the airport, Kings Park, where we've got a lot of visitors coming from overseas and over east, obviously, coming to visit, and places like that. So the susceptible plant up north now, I'm coming from the Department of Ag, so all the natives are not my forte. So I'll let you read through all the species that are susceptible for the northern part of our state. Basically Melaleuca, Syzygium, Leptospermum. And then we've got the susceptible plant for the southwest of the plant. And some species are more susceptible than others. A lot of work was done by the CSRO in Canberra, many post the detection in 2010, where a lot of species were tested in a high security lab to find out which species would have been the most susceptible and which one were more resistant. And unfortunately, a lot of species from WA are susceptible to the rust, and especially Geraldton wax. All right, so how can we recognize Myrtle Rust? Basically, it's if we see bright masses of spores that looks like yellow pollen on a myrtaceae, so eucalyptus trees, Geraldton wax, agonis, this kind of thing. Basically, chances is that it's going to be Myrtle Rust. There's not a lot of diseases that look like Myrtle Rust on our natives. Bearing in mind that I'm talking about the yellow pustule. Some of the symptoms before you can see the mass of spores can be a little bit more tricky to recognize. And as you can see on the photos here, we can see a little bit of yellow spores, but we also have some brownish sort of purple lesion, because basically once the plant is infected by the spores, it takes a little bit of time for the spores to be produced by the plant. And so it takes about like 10 to 12 days under good condition. So at some stage, the disease symptoms will basically look like a lot of brown spores, and there's a lot of other pathogens that can cause similar symptoms on our natives. But obviously the distinctive sign is the yellow mass of spores. And as you can see, basically it can affect all the aerial parts of the plants. So that can be fruit, flowers, stems, leaves. There's one thing that the disease affects mostly, it's basically the young shoots. So it doesn't really affect the old parts of the plant. So when you look for Myrtle Rust, you basically will be looking at the top of the canopy when the plant is actively growing, when there's green growth, basically. That's when, or that's the part of the plant that is going to be very susceptible to Myrtle Rust. It can be both on the top side or the underside of the leaf. All right, in terms of helping the department and also DPCA with surveillance, and that's what we want to talk to you about, and we want to show you how to use it. It's basically an app that the department created. It's called My Pest Guide Reporter, and it's a very great tool basically to take photos of something that you want to be identified. And as I can mention before, it can be plant pathogen, but it also can be insects or weeds, all these kind of things that basically the Department of Ag would have an interest in. So just to wrap it off, what do we need to do if we think that we have seen the Myrtle Rust somewhere? And we get calls and scares on a regular basis, especially from now on, early in spring, from members of the public that basically ring our department and think, I think I've seen Myrtle Rust somewhere. So basically the first thing is to do is basically to not touch the sample, because as we saw before, the spores can be easily dislodged and they can basically be blown away, or they can stick to your clothes. Another important thing to do is basically to make sure you take good photos and you sort of can go back or tell us exactly where you saw the symptom, because if we can't go back to this very same plant where you saw the symptom, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So therefore, that's when the My Pest Guide is really great, because when you will take a photo with the My Pest Guide Reporter, it will automatically take the GPS coordinates. So once you send us the report through the My Pest Guide, we will know exactly where you were, and we can go back exactly to the spot where you saw the disease. And on top of using the app, there's also, as Emma mentioned before, we've got a hotline and with a 1-800 number, and if you ring this hotline, basically it goes to our department. And yeah, early detection is really critical for a disease like Myrtle Rust. Once we find it here, if we don't catch it really early, the chances of getting on top of it is very slim, unfortunately. And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.